These forgotten breakfasts fueled the civil rights era, giving strength for marches and long days. Shared at humble tables, they held families together. What else lived in those mornings besides the food itself? Eggless mayonnaise biscuits were one of those recipes that came out of necessity, but lingered in kitchens long after shortages eased. Families discovered that a spoonful of mayonnaise could stand in for eggs and fat, binding dough into soft, fluffy biscuits without using precious rationed ingredients. During the civil rights era, this recipe stuck around because it was practical and affordable, perfect for households where money and supplies were always stretched thin. Mothers could bake a tray in the morning, serving them plain, with syrup, or alongside whatever small scraps were available. Children often carried leftovers in their pockets to school, eating them between lessons for a bit of comfort and energy. The taste was familiar and reliable, even if the origins came from harder times. Eggless mayonnaise biscuits symbolized more than just thrift. They carried the determination to keep families fed through resourcefulness. They became a quiet staple on breakfast tables that fueled long days of work, activism, and resilience. Cold cornbread and milk was often called the poor man's cereal, but it was more than a label, it was a lifeline. Day-old cornbread, often too dry to eat on its own, was crumbled into bowls and covered with milk or buttermilk, creating a filling meal that could be eaten quickly before school or work. For children, it was breakfast. For adults, it was sometimes supper, proving its versatility. It carried a tangy, comforting flavor that became familiar in many Southern households. What made it special was not the taste alone, but the reminder that nothing was wasted, not even stale bread. In communities with little to spare, this dish represented survival and practicality. Cold cornbread and milk was part of the rhythm of daily life, a dish that carried generations through hard times and into mornings of determination. Even with its simplicity, it gave people what they needed to keep going during days that demanded courage and endurance. Stewed prunes with grits might sound plain today, but it was a dish that kept households nourished and children strong. Prunes were affordable, dried, and easy to store, making them a reliable sweetener when sugar was limited. Simmered until soft and paired with steaming bowls of grits, they turned into a balanced meal of fiber, sweetness, and filling grains. Large families often leaned on this combination because it could stretch far with little cost. For children, stewed prunes made breakfast feel less plain, while adults valued the strength it provided for long workdays. It was also a dish that traveled through generations, passed down as a memory of lean years and perseverance. Families carried bowls of this simple breakfast before marches, school, and shifts, finding strength in the comfort of familiarity. Stewed prunes with grits became a quiet but powerful dish of the civil rights era, proving that even the humblest meals could carry dignity and hope. Crackling cornbread was a dish that brought a little joy and extra nourishment to the table, especially during times of struggle. Made by folding pork cracklings into traditional cornbread batter, it added both protein and crunch to a meal that was usually simple. Pork skins and fat were cheap and rarely wasted, and incorporating them into cornbread gave households a way to make breakfast more sustaining. Served hot from the skillet, crackling cornbread was filling enough to carry families through demanding days. It became a staple for marches, farm work, or long hours in factories, offering both flavor and strength. Children remembered the satisfying crunch, while adults valued the resourcefulness that turned scraps into sustenance. Crackling cornbread reflected a deeper story about resilience, showing how families took pride in making the most of what they had. More than just food, it symbolized unity at the table and fuel for the struggles ahead, keeping spirits alive through its warmth and heartiness. Onion and potato hash cakes were one of those breakfasts that always felt hearty, even without meat. Potatoes and onions were grated, mixed with flour or cornmeal, and fried into crisp patties that could be eaten plain or with hot sauce if available. The dish was cheap, easy to prepare, and could stretch across several plates, making it ideal for large households. It was often made in the early mornings before children headed to school or adults to long shifts at work. The taste was simple but filling, a combination of flavors that became closely tied to daily life in tough years. Families leaned on it not only for its thrift, but for the comfort it gave in the face of uncertainty. Onion and potato hash cakes fueled countless mornings of determination, carrying people through struggles outside the kitchen. They became a dish remembered not just for their flavor, but for their role in sustaining courage and community. Cane syrup biscuits were one of the sweetest ways families could begin a day when sugar was a luxury. Freshly baked biscuits were split open and drizzled with thick cane syrup, a cheaper sweetener that was widely available in the South. This breakfast offered comfort and energy, especially for children heading to school or adults preparing for long days of labor. Cane syrup added richness to otherwise plain bread, transforming simple biscuits into a treat. It was a dish tied directly to the land, since cane syrup came from local harvests and represented self-reliance. Families treasured it because it gave sweetness without breaking the budget, a rare indulgence during lean times. Cane syrup biscuits became more than breakfast. They were symbols of hope, resourcefulness, and the sweetness people clung to even in struggle. The dish carried both nourishment and spirit, helping fuel resilience during mornings that demanded strength. For many, it was the taste of home and perseverance. Rye coffee substitute with toast was born out of scarcity, but it carried warmth into countless mornings. Coffee beans were expensive and often hard to find, so roasted rye grains were brewed instead, producing a hot, bitter drink that resembled coffee. Families paired it with toast made from whatever bread was available, sometimes stale but still sustaining. The ritual of drinking a hot beverage in the morning mattered as much as the food itself, offering comfort before facing long days of uncertainty. Adults leaned on this substitute to keep their routines intact, finding strength in familiarity even without the real thing. Toast added bulk, and sometimes apple butter or syrup was spread on top if there was any to spare. Rye coffee substitute with toast reflected the creativity of families who refused to give up small comforts despite financial strain. It carried both warmth and resolve, fueling people with more than calories. It gave them routine and stability. Fried bologna on white bread was one of the most common breakfasts for working families during the Civil Rights era. Bologna was affordable, and frying it in a skillet brought out flavor and made it feel more substantial. Layered on soft white bread with mustard or hot sauce, it became a sandwich that was cheap, quick, and filling. For children, it was often packed as lunch, but for adults, it was breakfast before long shifts in fields, factories, or offices. The salty, savory taste was familiar and comforting, even if it came from one of the cheapest meats available. Fried bologna sandwiches symbolized both thrift and practicality, reflecting the reality of what many households relied on to get by. They were humble, but they carried enough strength to power people through demanding days. This dish became part of the memory of struggle and perseverance, a reminder that even inexpensive food could play a role in fueling determination and resilience. Homemade apple butter toast was a breakfast that stretched the fruits of summer into the long months of winter. Families would cook apples down with spices until they formed a thick, sweet spread, preserving it in jars for the cold seasons. Spread over stale bread, biscuits, or cornbread, apple butter transformed plain staples into something comforting. It was a way of saving harvests, ensuring that fruit could be enjoyed long after the orchards were bare. Apple butter toast was often served to children before school, giving them a sense of sweetness and strength in the mornings. Adults valued it for its practicality, as a single jar could last weeks and provide flavor to otherwise bland meals. It was not just a spread, but a memory of orchards, harvest work, and the determination to make food last. Apple butter toast became a symbol of both survival and warmth, offering families a taste of sweetness during hard times. Cornmeal dumplings in milk were a dish that blended simplicity with comfort, making them a favorite in many households when mornings were cold and food was scarce. Dumplings were mixed from cornmeal and flour, shaped into small rounds, and simmered in sweetened milk until soft and tender. The result was both filling and slightly sweet, a dish that could serve as either breakfast or dessert depending on how it was prepared. For families with children, it was often given in the morning to ensure they had energy for school. Adults relied on it as well, especially when more costly staples like bacon or sausage were unavailable. Cornmeal dumplings and milk carried a sense of warmth and security, proof that even the humblest ingredients could create satisfaction. It was a dish remembered not only for its flavor, but for the way it stretched supplies in hard times. It became part of the rhythm of survival, tying family memories to the shared strength of the table. Sweet potato coffee cakes were born of Southern improvisation, where fresh sweet potatoes were mashed into dough to stretch ingredients and add natural sweetness. Families mixed the potatoes with flour, sugar, and spices, creating a dense but moist cake that could be sliced and shared in the mornings. It carried the familiar flavor of sweet potatoes while saving on costly ingredients like butter or eggs. For children, sweet potato coffee cakes often felt like a treat, while adults appreciated the practicality of turning a root vegetable into a breakfast staple. The cake was filling and long-lasting, offering energy for long days of labor or activism. Because sweet potatoes were plentiful and inexpensive, this dish became a common sight on tables throughout the Civil Rights era. It was a symbol of making do, a reminder that families could create joy from what the land provided. Sweet potato coffee cakes carried resilience in every bite, bringing comfort to households even in the hardest years. Pickled pig feet with bread were a dish that reflected both thrift and flavor, often served cold in rural communities as a morning meal. Pig feet, simmered and preserved in vinegar brine with spices, became a protein source that lasted far longer than fresh meat. Eaten with slices of bread, it was salty, tangy, and surprisingly filling. Families turned to it because it was cheap and practical, ensuring no part of the animal ever went to waste. The flavor carried a boldness that lingered, and though not every child enjoyed it, many adults looked back on it with fondness as a food of survival. In households where resources were scarce, a plate of pickled pig feet with bread could be enough to start the day. It was more than just sustenance. It was a dish that represented resilience and the ability to create meals from overlooked cuts. Pickled pig feet with bread carried strength, memory, and the taste of endurance in difficult times. Molasses cornmeal custard was a dish that offered sweetness and substance while depending only on pantry staples. Families baked it by whisking cornmeal, milk, eggs when available, and molasses into a smooth mixture that thickened into a soft pudding in the oven. It was inexpensive to prepare, but filling enough to feed a household, making it a beloved breakfast or after-supper treat. The flavor was earthy and rich, with the deep sweetness of molasses carrying through each bite. Children often looked forward to it as a rare indulgence in households where desserts were not common. Adults valued it for its practicality, since it used cheap ingredients that could stretch for days. Molasses cornmeal custard represented thrift, but it also carried warmth and a sense of care, showing how families turned necessities into moments of comfort. It became part of the memory of kitchens during times of struggle, a dish that balanced scarcity with sweetness. Hog jowl and eggs was a breakfast that appeared especially around holidays, but its flavor and memory carried into everyday life. Hog jowl, a fatty cut of pork, was cheap and easy to find, especially in rural southern communities. Sliced thin and fried in skillets, it released rich fat that flavored the eggs cooked alongside it. Families treasured this dish when it appeared, because it added luxury to otherwise plain meals. It symbolized celebration, but it also reflected practicality, since hog jowl was inexpensive compared to other pork cuts. During the Civil Rights era, it fueled mornings with sustenance and comfort, giving families strength for long days ahead. Hog jowl and eggs represented both tradition and resilience, showing how households could enjoy moments of abundance even when times were lean. The dish was not only food, but a reminder of family gatherings, warmth, and the power of making the most of overlooked cuts. Scalded cornmeal porridge was one of the simplest breakfasts, but it was dependable and nourishing in every season. Cornmeal was whisked into boiling water, then enriched with a splash of milk if available, turning into a smooth, hot cereal. It was plain but filling, eaten with a little molasses, sugar, or even just salt depending on what a family had. Children grew up with bowls of it before heading to school, and adults leaned on it for early morning labor. The dish carried an earthy flavor that became familiar, tied to the smell of steaming pots in family kitchens. It was cheap to prepare and stretched far, making it a perfect meal during lean years. Scalded cornmeal porridge was proof that even the most basic ingredients could sustain life when nothing else was available. It became one of those dishes remembered with both fondness and respect, a reminder of perseverance and the strength found in simple foods. Homemade syrup sandwiches were one of the quickest breakfasts for children heading to school or adults heading to work. A slice of bread was spread with cane syrup or sorghum, then topped with another slice and eaten on the go. It was sticky, sweet, and satisfying, even if it was far from fancy. Families leaned on it because it was cheap, easy, and gave just enough energy to last until the next meal. For children, it often felt like a treat, even when it was born out of necessity. Adults remembered it as a sign of thrift, proof that households made do with what they had. Homemade syrup sandwiches were a dish of survival and memory, tied to the realities of life in communities that faced both economic and social hardship. They symbolized not only sweetness in lean times, but also the determination to keep moving forward each morning, fueled by the simplest of meals. Leftover pie for breakfast was a common occurrence in large households where nothing was wasted. Sweet potato pie, chess pie, or fruit pies baked the night before were often sliced and eaten cold in the morning with coffee or milk. For children, it was an exciting way to begin the day, while adults saw it as practical and filling. It reflected the rhythm of large families, where every meal had to stretch, and desserts could not be reserved only for evenings. Leftover pie carried both joy and necessity, showing how households turned indulgence into sustenance. The flavors of cinnamon, nutmeg, and sweet roots lingered, making mornings brighter even when other meals were sparse. Eating pie for breakfast symbolized both frugality and comfort, a way of preserving energy and spirit in difficult times. Leftover pie for breakfast became a fond memory for many, a dish that reflected resilience and the creativity of stretching food in every way possible. Rolled oats with sorghum drizzle were one of the more nourishing breakfasts that families turned to during lean years. Oats were cheap, filling, and easy to cook, while sorghum syrup replaced sugar as a natural sweetener. Together, they made a bowl that was hearty, sustaining, and connected to the land. Adults leaned on it to fuel long workdays, and children were sent off to school with the strength it provided. The flavor was earthy and slightly bittersweet, carrying the essence of thrift and self-reliance. Families valued it because it stretched far and could be flavored with seasonal fruit if available. Rolled oats with sorghum drizzle represented more than practicality. It symbolized survival, tied to agricultural tradition. It was a dish that reflected both health and heritage, remembered for its role in sustaining households during the civil rights era. It proved that nourishment could come from the humblest combinations, carrying families through mornings that demanded resilience and determination. Fried chicken neck with biscuits was another way families made use of overlooked cuts of poultry. Necks were cheap, flavorful, and could be fried crisp, then served alongside fresh biscuits for a sustaining breakfast. The meat was small but savory, and paired with biscuits, it created a meal that felt hearty despite its thrift. Families appreciated it because it ensured that no part of the bird was wasted, stretching poultry into multiple meals. Children remembered picking the meat from the bones, while adults valued the fat and flavor that carried into the biscuits. Fried chicken neck with biscuits was more than just food. It was an expression of resourcefulness. It provided both protein and comfort, fueling families for demanding days of work or marches. This dish symbolized resilience, showing how households turned scraps into sustenance without losing pride. Fried chicken neck with biscuits was a taste of perseverance, remembered as one of the breakfasts that carried people through struggle. Lard-fried corn pones were the kind of breakfast that stuck to your ribs and carried you through long hours of work or school. These dense corn patties were mixed from cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt before being fried golden in sizzling lard. The flavor was simple but deeply satisfying, with the crisp edges giving way to a soft interior that felt hearty in every bite. For families with little to spare, corn pones were portable and cheap, making them an everyday staple as well as a meal to take out into the fields. Children often carried them wrapped in cloth, while adults relied on them with strong coffee to start their mornings. They were versatile too, eaten plain, dipped in molasses, or even crumbled into buttermilk for a different kind of breakfast. Lard-fried corn pones were never fancy, but they were dependable, and that made them unforgettable. They represented resourcefulness and strength, the kind of food that reflected both necessity and comfort in kitchens where nothing went to waste. Salted fish cakes for breakfast carried a flavor that was bold, practical, and tied to tradition. Families made them by mixing scraps of salted fish with meal or leftover potatoes, shaping patties, and frying them crisp in a skillet. The result was savory, filling, and inexpensive, making it a reliable protein source when other meats were far out of reach. In coastal communities or areas where salted fish was a common trade, this dish became a morning standard, paired often with eggs if the household could spare them. Children sometimes found the taste strong, but adults appreciated its sustenance and the way it stretched simple ingredients. Fish cakes often carried the memory of family gatherings, with parents teaching children how to prepare them just as their parents once had. It was a dish that reflected survival, thrift, and culinary creativity, embodying how overlooked scraps could become the backbone of a morning meal. Salted fish cakes for breakfast held both history and hunger in balance, fueling resilience through humble bites. Cabbage and egg scramble was one of those quick, no-fuss breakfasts that households relied on when the pantry was light. Leftover cabbage, chopped fine, was sautéed in fat before being stirred into scrambled eggs, turning two basic foods into a sustaining dish. The cabbage stretched the eggs further, allowing larger families to fill plates without needing a dozen. It was hearty, yet inexpensive, providing vitamins and protein in a simple skillet meal. Farm families especially leaned on it, as cabbage was easy to grow and kept well into the colder months. The dish carried a humble flavor, but with hot sauce or pepper sprinkled on top, it was comforting and memorable. Children may not have loved cabbage, but when folded into eggs, it became tolerable and even enjoyable. For adults, it was practical, quick to make before long days of work, and efficient in using every bit of food available. Cabbage and egg scramble was modest, but it was deeply tied to survival and resilience in daily life. Pork dripping toast was a breakfast born of thrift, where nothing from a meal ever went unused. After roasting pork, families saved the fat drippings, which cooled and solidified into a spreadable form. Spread over a slice of bread and warmed, it became a quick, filling meal that carried both flavor and energy. Children often ate it before school, while adults grabbed it before heading to long days of work. The taste was rich and salty, a reminder of the meat that provided it even when only fat remained. Pork dripping toast reflected both scarcity and ingenuity, turning something that might otherwise be discarded into sustenance. It was a dish remembered fondly for its practicality, though it spoke clearly of hard times. For many, the memory of pork dripping toast carries with it the smell of the kitchen, the sound of a skillet cooling, and the resourcefulness of families who could not afford to waste a single drop. It was humble, yet deeply tied to survival. Cornmeal donuts were one of the rare indulgences families created when they wanted sweetness but had little to spend. Made from cornmeal mixed with flour, eggs if available, and sweetened with a touch of sugar or molasses, the dough was shaped into rounds and fried in lard until golden. Dusted with sugar, they became a treat that brought children running to the table. Unlike bakery donuts, these were dense, filling, and rustic, but they carried a charm that came from being homemade. Families turned to them especially on weekends or special mornings when a little extra joy was needed to break the monotony of hardship. Cornmeal donuts were proof that celebration could exist even in times of scarcity, transforming everyday ingredients into something special. They were portable too, often tucked into lunch pails for later in the day. Cornmeal donuts may not have been fancy, but they were treasured, carrying both sweetness and comfort into mornings that demanded resilience. Hominy pancakes were another clever way families stretched resources into filling meals. Hominy, boiled corn kernels treated with lye, was folded into simple flour batter and fried on a hot griddle until crisp on the edges. The result was a pancake that was hearty, chewy, and rich in flavor. Families leaned on this dish because hominy was inexpensive, filling, and often available in bulk. These pancakes were served plain or topped with syrup, molasses, or even just butter when sugar was scarce. Children enjoyed the slightly nutty texture, while adults appreciated that it carried them through long hours of work. Hominy pancakes were tied to heritage too, with roots reaching back to Native American food traditions that influenced Southern cooking. They were a reminder of resilience and cultural continuity, showing how simple staples could be reinvented to meet new needs. Hominy pancakes filled stomachs, but they also filled mornings with the comfort of tradition and the creativity of making do. Wild berry syrup on biscuits was a dish that connected people to the land around them. Families foraged for blackberries, muscadines, or other wild berries when money for store-bought sugar was scarce. The berries were boiled down into thick syrups, which were then poured generously over biscuits hot from the oven. This simple act turned foraging into a memory of sweetness, tying hard times to small joys. Children especially looked forward to berry syrup, savoring the rare taste of fruit in seasons when fresh produce was otherwise out of reach. Adults valued it as a resourceful way of providing variety without spending money. Wild berry syrup on biscuits carried with it the taste of summer, the memory of hands stained purple from picking, and the resilience of communities who found sweetness in the fields and woods. It was survival made delicious, a reminder that even in scarcity, families could still find ways to savor life's small pleasures. Gravy over rice was a breakfast swap that kept families fed when biscuits were too costly to make. Flour and fat gravy, seasoned with salt and pepper, was ladled over reheated rice to create a filling dish that stretched leftovers. It was hearty and sustaining, turning a side dish into the centerpiece of the morning meal. Families leaned on it because it required almost nothing extra, just the ability to stretch one meal into another. The flavor was simple, but it provided comfort, especially when eaten hot after cold nights. Children often carried bowls to the table with anticipation, while adults saw it as another way to avoid waste. Gravy over rice became a memory tied to thrift and practicality, proving that creativity was just as essential as ingredients during lean years. It was a dish that sustained both body and spirit, a reminder of how households carried themselves through difficult times with resourcefulness. Gravy over rice was survival turned into comfort food. Mustard greens with cornbread was a savory pairing that many families leaned on as a breakfast, though it was eaten at other times of day too. Mustard greens, boiled until tender, were seasoned with bits of pork fat or salt for flavor. Eaten alongside hot cornbread, the meal balanced vitamins with starch, offering both nutrition and energy. It was cheap, filling, and deeply tied to tradition. For children, the bitterness of the greens was often softened by crumbling cornbread into the Potlikker broth, making it more palatable. Adults valued it as a sustaining meal that honored resourcefulness and cultural heritage. Mustard greens with cornbread symbolized strength and survival, representing the kind of food that nourished more than just hunger. It was humble, but it carried families through mornings when resources were thin, but resolve was strong. This dish was one of the quiet backbones of community kitchens, a reflection of endurance and resilience during times of hardship. Cocoa powder porridge was a rare treat for children, transforming a simple breakfast into something sweet and comforting. Hot cereal, made from cornmeal or oats, was flavored with a spoonful of cocoa powder whisked into the pot. The cocoa gave it a richness and sweetness that brightened mornings, even when sugar was scarce. Families leaned on this dish as a way to bring joy to children during hard times, ensuring that breakfast carried not only nutrition, but happiness. For adults, it was a reminder of small indulgences made possible through creativity. Cocoa powder porridge was not common, but when it appeared, it was cherished and remembered. It symbolized resilience, the way families found ways to stretch the smallest luxuries into meaningful experiences. Even decades later, people recalled it with fondness, a dish that turned struggle into memory. Cocoa powder porridge was survival with sweetness, the kind of food that stayed alive in the hearts of those who ate it. Transparent pie might sound like an odd name, but in Kentucky, households it carried weight and tradition. This custard-like dessert was made with nothing more than eggs, sugar, and butter, ingredients that were simple but not always easy to spare. Families during the Civil Rights era knew the value of stretching ingredients into something that looked and tasted like a luxury. Transparent pie was rich but plain, often baked in simple crusts and served during family gatherings or community suppers. It was the kind of dessert that spoke to both poverty and pride, poor in what went into it, proud in how it turned out. In Black communities across Kentucky and beyond, pies like this were more than food. They were memories tied to togetherness and survival. Every slice served as both nourishment and a reminder of creativity. Transparent pie was a quiet dessert, yet one that stayed in the memory long after the plate was empty. Roasted chestnuts carried warmth and nourishment through the cold months when plantation rations were meager and gardens lay dormant. Enslaved families foraged chestnut trees that grew wild in the surrounding woods, gathering the smooth brown nuts and roasting them in hearth ashes or iron skillets until their shells cracked and the sweet flesh softened. The nuts' high energy content and natural sweetness made it an important source of calories and comfort, especially during long winter evenings. Roasted chestnuts became part of a wider African American food tradition, appearing in holiday celebrations and roadside markets after emancipation. Their gentle flavor paired well with cornmeal breads and simple stews, and many families passed down techniques for roasting and storing them long after the plantation era ended. Today, roasted chestnuts sold at winter festivals and city street corners carry echoes of that history, reminding us that what began as a survival practice also nurtured community and seasonal ritual for generations who transformed hardship into enduring culture. Collard greens with ham hocks carried the flavor of resilience and the slow patience of Southern cooking, qualities that mirrored the steady resolve of the civil rights struggle. Fresh collard leaves were washed carefully and simmered for hours with smoked ham hocks, onions, and a touch of vinegar until the greens softened into a tender, savory stew. The smoky pork enriched the broth known as Potlikker, a nutrient-rich liquid that families sipped or soaked up with cornbread to capture every drop of nourishment. These greens were served at community gatherings and late-night planning sessions, where activists and neighbors shared meals that strengthened both body and resolve. Children learned early that the long, simmering pot represented tradition and hope, carrying the taste of generations who endured hardship with grace. Collard greens with ham hocks remain a living symbol of perseverance and the belief that simple ingredients, when treated with care, can provide powerful comfort and lasting connection during times of great challenge and change. Hoe cakes were more than just a meal. They were survival cooked into thin cornmeal rounds right on a griddle or even on the flat side of a hoe over the fire. Families without flour or yeast relied on cornmeal, salt, and water, sometimes adding a little fat if they had it. The cakes cooked quickly and could be eaten plain, with syrup, or alongside beans and greens. For many, they were the daily bread, dependable and filling even when money was gone and choices were few. Children grew up with hoe cakes as part of life, learning early that a handful of meal could feed everyone if you knew how to stretch it. They were humble, yet powerful, proof that ingenuity kept people alive during years of hardship. Though rarely seen now, hoe cakes remain a symbol of strength, resourcefulness, and the will to survive against every obstacle. Their simplicity carries a history of resilience that still speaks when they are remembered on Southern tables. Sweet corn ice cream was a farmhouse specialty that blended seasonal corn with milk, sugar, and cream into a frozen treat. It may sound unusual today, but it was once considered a refreshing dessert across many southern and rural communities. Families who grew corn in abundance used every part of the crop, and turning it into ice cream showed both creativity and thrift. The result was a subtly sweet, rich, and slightly savory dessert that cooled people during hot summers. During the Civil Rights era, sweet corn ice cream could be found at community picnics, where large churns were made outdoors and shared with everyone present. The novelty of the flavor made it memorable for children, while adults appreciated its reminder of homegrown resilience. Making ice cream was also an act of joy in difficult times, requiring effort, patience, and a willingness to share the final product with neighbors. Sweet corn ice cream was not just a dessert, it was a celebration of turning simplicity into delight. Ground pumpkin seed. Porridge transformed leftover seeds into a hearty meal that supplied both protein and healthy oils. After pumpkins were cooked for pies or stews, the seeds were washed, dried, and pounded into a coarse meal. This meal was simmered slowly in water or thin milk, creating a creamy porridge with a subtle nutty flavor. Sweetened lightly with honey or molasses when available, it became a sustaining breakfast or evening dish that used every part of the harvest. The method reflected West African culinary traditions where ground seeds thickened soups and stews, showing how transplanted knowledge enriched American foodways. Generations after emancipation, pumpkin seed porridge remained a seasonal specialty in some rural areas, appreciated for its nourishing qualities and gentle taste. Modern cooks might recognize it in contemporary seed-based milks and cereals, proving that this centuries-old practice still influences how we eat today. Ground pumpkin seed. Porridge highlights the wisdom of never wasting what nature provides and celebrates a heritage of careful resourcefulness that continues to inspire. Buttermilk biscuits brought flaky, tender warmth to countless mornings when organizers prepared for marches or long trips to rallies across the South. Grandmothers and church cooks cut cold butter into flour and baking powder, folding the dough gently to create delicate layers that rose high in the oven. The biscuits emerged golden and fragrant, ready to be split and filled with country ham, drizzled with honey, or enjoyed plain with strong coffee. Their quick baking time made them perfect for feeding groups of volunteers before dawn departures, while their simple ingredients kept costs low. Children loved them with homemade jam, and adults relied on their steady comfort when days promised uncertainty and challenge. Buttermilk biscuits symbolized hospitality and steadfastness, offering a taste of home to those traveling for justice. Each warm bite reminded everyone that strength begins with nourishment, and that even the smallest gesture of care can sustain courage in the face of adversity. These biscuits remain a lasting emblem of Southern generosity and the quiet power of shared food. Pokeberry wine, carefully made from foraged berries, was not just a drink, but a folk remedy tied to survival. The deep purple berries, toxic if mishandled, were boiled and strained, creating a liquid believed to ease pain and treat ailments. In communities with little access to doctors, such home cures became essential. Families passed down recipes through generations, each step carefully guarded to avoid harm while drawing out the plant's healing potential. Housewives prepared it in small batches, knowing it was meant more for medicine than pleasure. Some elders took small sips daily, swearing by its ability to ease arthritis or calm nerves. The drink symbolized ingenuity, proof that even the wild and dangerous could be turned into something useful with knowledge and care. Children were warned never to eat the berries raw, but they grew up knowing the wine's importance to family survival. Though science later questioned its effectiveness, pokeberry wine was once a lifeline born from tradition and necessity. Prune cake was another dessert that thrived because of its practicality and nourishing qualities. Prunes were affordable, shelf-stable, and easy to find, making them a common ingredient in households that had to stretch every resource. The cake itself was spiced, moist, and surprisingly sweet, a far cry from the plain reputation prunes sometimes carried. During the Civil Rights era, prune cake appeared often at church socials and Sunday dinners, where its comforting flavor helped people gather in solidarity. It was not a fancy dessert, but it had a richness that made it feel like something special. Families baked it in sheet pans or loaf pans, depending on what they had, and it sliced neatly for sharing. The spices gave it warmth that paired well with coffee after long meetings or services. Prune cake reflected both frugality and care, proving that even the simplest fruits could create lasting memories of sweetness in times of difficulty. Pokeweed greens offered one of the first fresh tastes of spring for people living with few supplies after a long winter. Young pokeweed shoots emerged early and plentifully, but they carried natural toxins that required careful boiling in several changes of water. Enslaved cooks, drawing on African knowledge of wild plants, mastered this technique to create a tender, spinach-like dish that supplied vital vitamins when gardens were only beginning to grow. Seasoned with a bit of salt pork or a sprinkle of wild herbs, poke greens became a welcome sign of the changing season. Long after emancipation, poke salad festivals in Appalachia and the Deep South celebrated this once humble plant, turning a survival ingredient into a community tradition. The careful preparation taught by generations of African American cooks is still followed today, preserving both safety and flavor. Pokeweed greens remind us that deep botanical knowledge and patient cooking transformed a potentially dangerous weed into nourishing food that helped sustain families through the hardest times. Fried catfish brought a festive spirit to fundraisers and church picnics across the Deep South, drawing crowds who came for fellowship as well as for the crisp, golden fish. Freshly caught catfish fillets were dredged in seasoned cornmeal and quickly fried in bubbling oil until the crust turned crunchy and the flesh remained tender and flaky. Volunteers cooked outdoors in large iron pots, their laughter mingling with the sound of sizzling oil and the distant hum of gospel songs. Serving plates of fried catfish helped raise money for bus trips to marches and for families supporting activists away from home. Children waited eagerly for their share, enjoying the mild, sweet flavor brightened with a squeeze of lemon. The dish represented abundance drawn from local rivers and the generosity of neighbors who gave their time and skill to the cause. Roasted acorns were a last resort food that demanded patience, persistence, and determination. Families gathered acorns from oak trees, leaching them in water to wash away their bitterness. Once roasted or ground into meal, they became a base for porridge, bread, or simple roasted snacks. The work was long, but the result was nourishment when no other options existed. Children often joined in the gathering, their small hands filling baskets that would help carry the family through another lean season. The flavor was earthy and nutty, reminding everyone of the forests that provided when store shelves could not. Housewives baked with acorn meal not out of choice, but out of survival, proving that even the hardest, most overlooked resource could be transformed into food. Roasted acorns are rarely spoken of now, but they represent a reality of the Jim Crow South, that people survived by using everything the land offered. They were sustenance born from endurance, and they kept families alive. Peach cobbler carried the sweetness of Georgia orchards and the comfort of a dessert tied to Martin Luther King's Atlanta roots. Juicy peaches were sliced and simmered with sugar and a hint of cinnamon before being blanketed with biscuit dough or a buttery crust that baked to golden perfection. The bubbling fruit filled kitchens with a fragrant steam that signaled a treat for every sense. Served warm with fresh cream or a scoop of homemade ice cream, peach cobbler offered hospitality and pride in local harvests. Church gatherings and planning meetings often ended with generous servings of this beloved dessert, bringing smiles and a taste of home to activists far from their own families. The dish celebrated the abundance of the South while reinforcing the bonds of community and the sweetness of shared effort. Peach cobbler remains a timeless emblem of Georgia comfort, reminding everyone that the fight for justice was sustained by flavors that spoke of family, tradition, and enduring hope. Bay leaf infusion offered warmth and gentle comfort, using one of the few aromatic plants that grew wild near plantation quarters. Fresh or dried bay leaves were gathered from native bay trees and steeped in hot water to create a soothing tea with a light floral scent and mild medicinal qualities. This infusion was believed to aid digestion and ease colds, and it provided a calming moment during hard days. The knowledge of bay's healing properties came from both African herbal traditions and local indigenous practices, merging into a shared understanding of the land's quiet gifts. Even after emancipation, African American communities continued to brew bay tea for health and hospitality, and its subtle fragrance remains a hallmark of Southern kitchens where bay leaves still flavor soups and stews. Bay leaf infusion stands as a gentle reminder that survival was not only about calories but also about care, showing how enslaved people drew strength and solace from the natural world around them. Carrot cake with cream cheese frosting became a signature dessert of the 1960s when home cooks began experimenting with vegetables in sweet recipes. The grated carrots added moisture and a subtle sweetness, while cream cheese frosting balanced it with tang. This cake gained popularity quickly because it used ingredients that were affordable and easy to find while still looking impressive at church potlucks or community gatherings. Families passed the recipe around in handwritten booklets, and soon carrot cake was a shared memory across neighborhoods. During the Civil Rights era, baking carrot cake was also a way of showing pride in creativity, proving that even simple ingredients could create something elegant. Slices of it often appeared at social meetings where people gathered to share food and strengthen unity. The thick frosting gave it a celebratory feel even when times were hard. Carrot cake carried both practicality and joy, making it one of the forgotten desserts that deserves to be remembered for its role in bringing people together. If these breakfasts stirred memories of strength, drop a comment, like the video, and subscribe to keep history alive at the table.